The mysterious little girl. It was a cold autumn evening in the quiet town of Windmere, where golden leaves rustled in the gentle breeze, and the gas lamps flickered like distant stars. Arthur Caldwell, a retired professor, was on his usual evening stroll when he noticed something peculiar: a little girl, no older than 10, standing alone at the edge of the town square. She wore an old-fashioned white dress, slightly tattered at the edges, and had long raven black hair that cascaded over her shoulders. Her piercing blue eyes reflected the gaslight's glow, making her seem almost ethereal. Arthur hesitated before approaching. "Are you lost, dear?" he asked kindly. The girl did not respond. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if studying him. After a moment, she finally spoke in a soft voice. "I am looking for something." Arthur frowned. "Looking for what?" The girl didn't answer. She simply turned and walked away, her bare feet barely making a sound on the cobblestone streets. Arthur watched as she disappeared into the mist that had begun to settle over the town. The mystery deepens. The next day, Arthur couldn't get the girl out of his mind. Who was she? Where had she come from? Had anyone else seen her? He decided to ask around. At the local bakery, he spoke with Mrs. Whitmore, a woman known for her sharp memory and keen gossiping habits. "A little girl in an old-fashioned dress, you say," she mused, kneading dough. "Sounds familiar, but, oh dear, I can't quite place it." At the town's general store, old Mr. Thompson narrowed his eyes. "That's an odd thing to ask, Professor Caldwell. No one's seen a child like that around here for years." "For years?" Arthur's curiosity grew. "What do you mean?" The old man hesitated, then leaned in. "You must have heard of the Fairchild tragedy, haven't you?" Arthur shook his head. "Well, about 40 years ago, a little girl named Eleanor Fairchild went missing. The town searched for weeks, but she was never found." Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. The description, an old-fashioned dress, raven black hair, piercing blue eyes, matched exactly. "But that's impossible," he murmured. "The girl I saw was no ghost. She was real." Following the trail. Determined to uncover the truth, Arthur retraced his steps to the town square that evening. Sure enough, as the gas lamps flickered, the girl appeared again, standing in the same spot. "Eleanor," he called out, testing the name. The girl turned to him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You can see me?" Arthur nodded. "Yes. Who are you? What are you looking for?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Home." The word sent a shiver through Arthur. "Where is your home?" The girl looked towards the outskirts of the town. "The old Fairchild house." Arthur's breath caught. The Fairchild estate had been abandoned for decades. The townsfolk believed it was cursed, and no one dared step inside. But if this girl, Eleanor or not, was leading him there, he had no choice but to follow. The House of Secrets. The house loomed like a forgotten relic of the past, its windows dark and lifeless. The front gate creaked as Arthur pushed it open, stepping cautiously inside. The girl walked ahead without fear, guiding him toward the entrance. As they crossed the threshold, a strange sensation washed over him. The air inside was thick with the scent of old books and decayed wood. The furniture was still in place, though draped with dust-laden sheets. It was as if time had simply paused. "Why have you brought me here?" Arthur asked. The girl pointed to a grand piano in the corner. "There's something inside." With trembling hands, Arthur lifted the lid of the piano bench. Inside lay a bundle of aged letters, bound with a faded red ribbon. He picked one up and carefully unfolded it. The ink had faded, but he could still read the words. "Dearest Eleanor, I will find you. No matter how long it takes." The signature was that of Henry Fairchild, Eleanor's father. Arthur turned to the girl, but she was no longer there. Instead, the air felt lighter, as if something heavy had been lifted from the house. He realized, then, that Eleanor had never truly been lost. She had simply been waiting for someone to find her story, to bring her home one last time. A revelation in the library. Just as Arthur was about to leave, a faint whisper echoed in the air. "Read them." He hesitated, then carried the letters to a dusty armchair in what must have once been the Fairchild family's library. He spent hours reading through Henry Fairchild's desperate words. The letters spoke of sleepless nights, relentless searching, and pleas to anyone who would listen. One letter caught his attention more than the others. I followed the whispers in the forest. They say she is there, waiting. But the trees don't let me in. The forest. Arthur knew there was a dense, untamed woodland behind the estate. Had Eleanor been lost there all this time? Determined, he set out at first light, making his way toward the overgrown path that led into the trees. The deeper he went, the colder it became, until at last, he reached a small clearing. There, amid the fallen leaves and ancient stones, stood a single gravestone, covered in moss. Eleanor Fairchild. Arthur's breath caught. But, how? A soft giggle echoed through the trees, and he turned just in time to see a flash of white disappear into the morning mist. A voice, faint and wistful, whispered, "Thank you." The weight of history settled on Arthur's shoulders. He had uncovered the truth, but more importantly, he had given peace to a soul long forgotten. As he walked back to town, the wind carried a final whisper through the trees. Eleanor Fairchild was finally home. The Benevolent Lie. Chapter 1: The Old Bookstore. In the heart of Belmere, a small town where time moved at a gentler pace, stood an old bookstore named Whispering Pages. Tucked away in a quiet corner, the shop was a haven of forgotten stories and treasured memories. It was here that Eleanor Carter had spent most of her life, tending to the store that her late grandfather had built from the ground up. Eleanor, now in her early 30s, found solace in the scent of old paper and ink. The store wasn't just her livelihood, it was her sanctuary. She had inherited it after her parents passed away in a tragic accident, and though life had been kind to her in some ways, she carried the weight of loss heavily. One crisp autumn morning, as she unlocked the shop's creaky wooden door, she found an unfamiliar figure standing just outside. A boy, no older than 10, with tousled auburn hair and the most striking green eyes she had ever seen. He wore a slightly oversized coat, his hands buried deep in his pockets. "Are you looking for something, dear?" Eleanor asked kindly. The boy hesitated before answering. "I'm looking for a book. But I don't know the name." She smiled gently. "Well, maybe I can help. Do you remember anything about it?" He bit his lip, looking down. "It's about a boy who finds a way to fix something that's broken." Eleanor nodded, leading him inside. She had plenty of books that fit that description, but something about the way he said it made her feel there was more to his words than met the eye. Chapter 2: The Little Visitor. The boy visited the bookstore every day after that. He never stayed long, but each time, he would browse the shelves, flipping through pages as though he were searching for something incredibly important. Eleanor grew fond of him, always welcoming him with a warm cup of tea or a cookie from the bakery next door. One day, she finally asked, "Do your parents know you're here?" The boy hesitated before answering, "My mom knows." That was the first lie. Eleanor noticed how he never mentioned a father, and she never pressed. Instead, she let him explore at his own pace, allowing the boy to slip in and out of the store as if it were his second home. It wasn't until a cold December evening that everything changed. Chapter 3: The Truth Behind the Lie. It was just past closing time when Eleanor saw the boy standing outside the store again, shivering in the cold. She rushed to him. "Are you okay?" He nodded, but his eyes were glassy, his lips pale. I don't have anywhere to go." Eleanor knelt beside him, wrapping her scarf around his small shoulders. "What do you mean? Where's your mother?" The boy hesitated, then whispered, "She's gone." Eleanor's heart clenched. "Gone where?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled letter. She carefully unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words written in trembling ink. "To whoever finds my son, his name is Leo. He's kind, bright, and braver than he thinks. I am sick, and I can no longer take care of him. I don't want him to see me like this. If you're reading this, please don't send him away. Please let him believe I'll come back for him. Let him have hope for just a little while longer." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. She looked at Leo, realizing why he had been searching for a book about fixing broken things. He wanted a way to fix the one thing he couldn't, his mother's absence. Chapter 4: A Home of Lies and Love. That night, Eleanor made a decision. She couldn't bear to let Leo go to an orphanage. So, she did something she never thought she'd do. She told him a lie. "Your mom asked me to take care of you," she whispered, holding his tiny hands in hers. "She said she'll come back when she's better." Leo's eyes, filled with unshed tears, brightened just a little. "Really?" Eleanor smiled, though her heart ached. "Really?" For the first time since she met him, Leo looked at ease. He nestled into the warmth of her embrace, sighing softly. "Okay. I'll wait for her." Chapter 5, The Years That Followed. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into years. Leo grew up in the bookstore, helping Eleanor run it, dusting shelves, and even recommending books to customers. He never stopped asking about his mother, and each time, Eleanor told the same gentle lie. "She's getting better. She wants you to be strong." And so, Leo became strong. He grew into a kind young man, intelligent and full of life, never knowing the truth that Eleanor carried in her heart. It wasn't until Leo was 18, standing tall with a college acceptance letter in his hands, that Eleanor knew she had to tell him. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, she held his hands and whispered, "Leo, there's something I have to tell you." He looked at her, understanding already dawning in his eyes. "You don't have to, Eleanor." She blinked. "What?" Leo smiled, though his eyes were filled with tears. "I've always known. I just didn't want you to be sad." Eleanor broke down, sobbing into his shoulder. "I only wanted you to be happy. You gave me a home when I had none," Leo whispered. "That's the best truth I could ever have." Chapter 6, The Final Chapter. Years later, when Eleanor grew old, Leo took over the bookstore. He expanded it, filled it with more books and laughter, and made sure it was never just a shop but a sanctuary for lost souls, just like it had been for him. And when people asked him about Eleanor, he always smiled and said, "She told me a beautiful lie once. But in the end, it became the greatest truth of my life." And so, Whispering Pages remained a place of love, of second chances, and of stories that healed, even the ones that began with a lie. The Star's Journey, A View from the Heavens. Chapter 1, Awakening in the Cosmos. Far beyond the reach of human hands, nestled among billions of its kind, a tiny star shimmered in the vast tapestry of the night sky. Unlike its neighbors, which burned in silent dignity, this particular star had a secret: it could think, wonder, and most remarkably, it could see. Not just the celestial dance of planets and comets, but something far more fascinating, the world below. For countless millennia, the star gazed upon Earth, marveling at the endless spectacle of human life. From its perch in the heavens, it watched civilizations rise and fall, wars rage and end, and love bloom and fade. But of all the wonders it had observed, nothing fascinated it more than the tiny beings that scurried across the land like ants, building, dreaming, and shaping their world with an insatiable curiosity. Tonight, as the moon cast its silver glow over the planet, the star prepared for another evening of observation. It had seen so much already, but every night, the humans found new ways to surprise it. Chapter 2, The Dreamers and the Builders. The first thing the star noticed was the way humans defied the rules of nature. Unlike the trees that remained rooted in place, or the rivers that followed a fixed path, humans were creatures of change. They built towering cities of stone and steel, their lights twinkling like fallen stars upon the land. They carved through mountains, tamed wild rivers, and even dared to touch the sky with their flying machines. But what fascinated the star most was how humans were not satisfied with mere survival. No, they were dreamers. They painted, wrote stories, composed music, and sculpted monuments, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They wove tales about love and loss, myths of gods and monsters, and even stories about the stars themselves. Some looked up at the sky with longing, dreaming of visiting the very cosmos the star called home. The star chuckled at the irony. Humans dreamed of the stars, just as the star dreamed of them. Chapter 3, The Lovers and the Lonely. As the night deepened, the star turned its attention to a quiet park below. On a wooden bench sat two young lovers, their hands intertwined. The star had watched countless romances unfold, some burned bright and fierce like comets, while others flickered gently like candlelight. But no matter the form, love was always the same, a force that bound humans together, defying logic and reason. Yet, for every pair of lovers, there were those who sat alone. The star often saw these lonely figures, staring wistfully at the sky. It wished it could whisper to them, tell them that they were never truly alone, that someone, something, was watching over them, even from afar. Sometimes, the lonely ones made wishes upon the star. The star could not grant them, but it listened. And sometimes, that was enough. Chapter 4, The Foolish and the Wise. Despite its admiration for humans, the star had also seen their foolishness. It watched as they fought over invisible borders, waged wars over beliefs, and poisoned their own air and water in the name of progress. It saw them chase wealth at the cost of happiness, hoard more than they needed while others went without. But for every act of destruction, there was an act of kindness. A mother feeding a stray cat. A stranger helping another carry their burdens. A child planting a tree that they would never sit under. Humans were strange creatures, capable of both great destruction and immense compassion. The star could never quite understand them, but perhaps that was what made them so fascinating. Chapter 5, The Seekers of the Stars. One night, the star noticed something peculiar. A group of humans had gathered on a mountaintop, peering at the sky through long, silver tubes. Astronomers. Seekers of the unknown. The star had seen them before, humans who dedicated their lives to understanding the heavens. They built great observatories, sent machines into space, and even walked upon the moon. The star admired them, for they were the ones who reached beyond their small world, striving to understand the vastness of the universe. One astronomer, a girl no older than 10, stood apart from the group. She pointed up at the sky, her eyes filled with wonder. The star wished it could speak to her, tell her all the secrets of the cosmos. But it remained silent, content to shine a little brighter for her that night. Chapter 6, A Universe in Motion. The star had watched humanity for centuries, but even it knew that nothing remained the same forever. Empires crumbled, technology evolved, and the people who had once gazed at the sky in awe now built machines that could touch the edge of space. And the star itself? It would not last forever, either. One day, it would burn its last, fading into the endless night. But until then, it would keep watching, keep listening, and keep marveling at the strange, wonderful, imperfect beings who lived beneath it. Perhaps, in some distant future, a human would stand upon another world and look back at the night sky, searching for a familiar twinkle. And perhaps, they would remember that once upon a time, a star had watched over them, just as they had dreamed of reaching it. Chapter 7, The Star's Farewell. As eons passed, the star grew weaker. It burned a little less brightly, its core growing weary with age. But before it faded entirely, it made a final wish of its own. It wished to be remembered. And so, in a brilliant burst of light, the star released its final gift, a supernova, illuminating the sky with dazzling colors. People all over Earth looked up in awe, not knowing that a silent guardian had just said goodbye. But the light of the star would travel for thousands of years, reaching the eyes of those yet to be born. And in books, in whispers, in dreams, its story would live on. The star smiled one last time. And then, it became part of the universe once more. Abby's tranquil days in the countryside with Grandma. Chapter 1, A City Girl in the Countryside. Abby had always considered herself a city girl. Born and raised in the bustling heart of Chicago, she was accustomed to noisy streets, the hum of traffic, and the convenience of late-night coffee shops. So when her mother announced that she would be spending the entire summer in her grandmother's countryside home, Abby thought her life was over. "You'll love it, sweetheart," her mother assured her while shoving folded clothes into Abby's suitcase. "It's peaceful, quiet, and exactly what you need to relax." Relax? Abby thought. She thrived on the chaos of the city. What was she supposed to do all summer in a sleepy little village with no Wi-Fi and nothing but cows and fields? Reluctantly, she boarded the train to Willowbrook, a picturesque countryside town that looked like it belonged in an old postcard. Her grandmother, Eleanor Mayfield, was waiting for her at the tiny train station, her smile as warm as the summer sun. "Welcome home, darling," Grandma said, wrapping Abby in a gentle but firm hug. "I hope you're ready for a real adventure." Abby highly doubted it. Chapter 2, First Morning in Willowbrook. Abby woke up the next morning to birds chirping instead of car horns, the scent of fresh bread drifting from the kitchen instead of exhaust fumes. The house was a charming old cottage with flower boxes on the windows, a vegetable garden in the backyard, and an ever-present golden retriever named Biscuit. "Come have breakfast, sweetheart," Grandma called from the kitchen. Abby dragged herself to the dining table, surprised to find a spread of homemade strawberry jam, warm scones, and a large glass of fresh milk. Everything tasted richer, fuller, nothing like the store-bought food she was used to. "I thought I'd take you to the farmer's market today," Grandma said, sipping her tea. "You can meet some of the neighbors." Abby wasn't thrilled about socializing with a bunch of old people, but she nodded. It was either that or stare at the cows all day. Chapter 3: The Farmer's Market Surprise. The farmer's market was more lively than Abby expected. Stalls overflowed with fresh produce, homemade pies, and jars of golden honey. Elderly women sold hand-knitted scarves, children chased each other around hay bales, and a bluegrass band played cheerful music near the center. Abby trailed behind her grandmother, watching as she greeted nearly everyone by name. It was strange. Back home, people barely nodded at each other in the elevator, yet here, everyone acted like family. "Eleanor, dear." A stout woman with rosy cheeks waved at Grandma. "Who's this lovely young lady?" "This is my granddaughter, Abby," Grandma said proudly. "She's staying with me for the summer." "Oh, you must try the apple cider." The woman handed Abby a cup. "It's the best in Willowbrook." Abby hesitated but took a sip. It was cold, crisp, and better than any drink she had ever bought from a city cafe. Maybe, just maybe, this place wasn't as bad as she thought. Chapter 4: The Chicken Incident. Abby's growing appreciation for the countryside took a slight detour when she was tasked with feeding the chickens. "Just sprinkle the feed around," Grandma instructed. "And don't worry, they're harmless." Abby approached the chicken coop cautiously. The hens eyed her with an unsettling level of intelligence. As soon as she tossed the feed, they charged, wings flapping, beaks pecking, feathers flying. Abby shrieked and ran for her life, nearly tripping over a watering can. Grandma laughed so hard she had to sit down on the porch steps. "City girl meets country life," she chuckled. "Don't worry, you'll get used to it." Abby scowled at the chickens, who clucked in triumph. This was far from the relaxing summer her mother had promised. Chapter 5: A Hidden Talent. A week into her stay, Abby discovered something unexpected: she loved baking. One rainy afternoon, with nothing better to do, she wandered into the kitchen. Grandma was kneading dough, humming an old tune. "Want to help?" she asked. Abby shrugged, but before she knew it, she was elbow-deep in flour, carefully rolling out dough for a pie. The rhythmic motions, the scent of cinnamon, the warmth of the kitchen, it was oddly satisfying. When the pie came out of the oven, golden and bubbling with blueberries, Abby felt an unfamiliar sense of pride. She had made this. And it tasted incredible. "I think we've got a baker in the family," Grandma said with a wink. Chapter 6: The Magic of a Simple Life. As the days passed, Abby found herself falling into the rhythm of country life. She helped pick strawberries, learned how to fish, and even, reluctantly, made peace with the chickens. She spent evenings on the porch with Grandma, drinking tea and watching fireflies dance in the twilight. She wrote letters to her friends back in Chicago, describing the town, the people, the adventures. "I thought I'd be bored," she admitted in one letter, "but I think I actually love it here." Chapter 7: Saying Goodbye, for now. The summer passed in a blur, and soon it was time for Abby to return to the city. As she packed her suitcase, she felt a surprising heaviness in her chest. "I'm going to miss you, Grandma," she said softly. "Oh, you'll be back," Grandma said with a knowing smile. "Once the countryside gets into your heart, it never really leaves." And she was right. When Abby boarded the train back to Chicago, she already knew she'd return next summer. Because somewhere between the farmer's market, the chicken fiasco, and the blueberry pies, she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for: a different kind of happiness, one woven into the simple, quiet magic of country life. Epilogue: A tradition begins. Years later, Abby returned every summer, making it a tradition. She brought her friends, then later, her own children. They, too, learned how to bake pies, pick strawberries, and face the terrifying chickens. And every year, as the fireflies flickered in the twilight, she and Grandma sat on the porch, sipping tea, knowing that some things, like love, laughter, and a perfect summer in Willowbrook, never changed. The Extraordinary Tale of Becoming a Chair. Chapter 1: A Very Strange Morning. I had always heard of bizarre things happening in the world, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened that fateful morning. I woke up feeling stiff. Not just the usual morning stiffness, but something much, much worse. I couldn't move my arms. My legs weren't responding. Panic gripped me as I tried to sit up, but all I could manage was a faint creaking sound. Wait. Creaking. Something was very, very wrong. I turned my gaze downward, or at least, I tried to, since I no longer seemed to have a head to turn. Instead of seeing my usual hands and feet, I saw legs. 4 wooden legs. And my body. It was hard, polished, and strangely flat. It took me a few agonizing moments to process the unthinkable truth. I had turned into a chair. Chapter 2, The Panic and the Reality. Okay, let's not freak out, I told myself. This is probably just a dream. A really, really weird dream. Maybe I had watched too many cartoons last night. Maybe I was sleepwalking and ended up tangled in furniture. Maybe I had been cursed by some unseen cosmic force. Oh, who was I kidding? There was no rational explanation for this. My breathing, oh wait, did I even have lungs, sped up, and I tried to wiggle, shake, anything. But no, all I could manage was a slight wobble. The worst part? My roommate, Josh, was still asleep in his bed. How was I going to explain this to him? I had no mouth, and I must scream. Chapter 3, Discovery and Denial. Minutes turned into what felt like hours, and soon enough, Josh groggily sat up, rubbing his eyes. He yawned and stretched before looking around the room. Then, without even glancing in my direction, he muttered, "Weird. Did I always have this chair?" I wanted to yell, "Josh, you idiot, it's me," but all I could do was sit there, completely and utterly useless. Josh, still half asleep, got up, walked right past me, and headed to the bathroom. This was bad. This was very bad. How was I supposed to get his attention? Should I try wobbling again? Maybe if I tipped myself over. Just as I was planning my next move, he returned, fully dressed, and, oh no. No, 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 no. He was walking towards me. Chapter 4, The Horror of Being Sat On. Josh, the absolute menace, the barbarian, the unspeakable brute, sat on me. I cannot describe the horror I felt in that moment. The sheer indignity. The betrayal. The fact that my so-called best friend had the audacity to plop his entire weight onto me without so much as a second thought. What was worse? He had a bowl of cereal in one hand and his phone in the other. He was scrolling social media while using me as a seat. I had never felt so violated in my entire existence. Chapter 5, The Adjustment Period. Days passed. Or maybe just hours. Time was weird when you were a piece of furniture. Josh continued his life, completely unaware of my suffering. I endured being dragged across the floor, being used as a makeshift table, and, my personal favorite, being shoved against the wall when he decided he didn't like where I was positioned. At one point, he even draped his sweaty gym clothes over me. Sweaty. Gym. Clothes. The horror. But slowly, I started to accept my fate. Maybe this was my life now. Maybe I was doomed to be an inanimate object for all eternity. I would never eat pizza again. Never play video games. Never binge watch an entire TV series in one night. Unless there was a way to turn back. Chapter 6, The Breakthrough. One evening, Josh had some friends over. It was a classic, pizza and video games, night, and guess who was the designated gaming chair? Me. As one of Josh's friends flopped down onto me, I suddenly felt different. A weird tingling sensation spread through my wooden frame. It was subtle at first, but then it grew stronger. I didn't know what was happening, but it felt like something was changing. And then, poof. I was human again. Chapter 7, The Aftermath. I landed on the floor with a loud thud, startling everyone in the room. Josh dropped his slice of pizza. His friends screamed. Someone spilled soda all over the couch. Dude. Where did you come from? Josh shrieked. I stared at him, panting, disoriented, my limbs aching from what felt like centuries of stiffness. I tried to form words, but all that came out was, I was the chair. Silence. Then, Josh started laughing. Laughing. You were the chair. Ha ha ha, nice try, man. Where were you hiding? I groaned. No one was going to believe me. And honestly, maybe that was for the best. Epilogue, Lessons from Life as a Chair. In the following weeks, I tried my best to forget about my bizarre experience, but I never quite looked at furniture the same way again. Every time I sat on a chair, I wondered, was it watching? Was it secretly screaming? And as for Josh, well, let's just say I never let him sit on me again. Ever. Bonus chapter, The Chair's Revenge. Weeks later, I devised a plan. One evening, while Josh was watching TV, I snuck up behind him with a spray bottle filled with cold water. Just as he was about to lean back into his chair, I sprayed him right on the neck. What the? He jumped up, startled. I grinned. Now you know how it feels to be unexpectedly touched by something you don't understand. Josh narrowed his eyes. You're never letting this go, are you? Never, I said, plopping down on the couch. Finally, the seat of power was mine. A Father's Love, The Dog Who Stayed. Chapter 1, A Farewell That Wasn't the End. The day Erin lost her father was the day a part of her heart vanished. It was sudden, unfair, and left behind an emptiness that nothing seemed to fill. Her father, James, had always been the pillar of their family, kind, protective, and full of laughter. The house that was once filled with his voice now felt cold, like an empty shell of what it once was. Her mother, Claire, retreated into herself, burying her grief beneath long hours at work, pretending everything was fine. Erin knew better. They both knew better. But grief had a way of making people build walls instead of bridges. A few weeks after the funeral, something strange happened. A dog appeared. It wasn't just any dog. It was a golden retriever with deep, familiar brown eyes, the exact shade of her father's. He sat outside their house, tail wagging, as if he belonged there, as if he had always belonged there. But Erin's mother, Claire, hated dogs. Shoo! Go away, she yelled, waving her arms at the dog. But it didn't leave. Instead, it just sat there, staring at her with a knowing look. Chapter 2, A Dog with Familiar Habits. The golden retriever refused to leave. No matter how many times Claire tried to chase him away, he always found his way back. He waited outside their home every morning and curled up on the front porch every night. Erin, however, was enamored. She had never owned a dog before, but something about this one felt right. It felt like home. Mom, please? Can we keep him? Erin pleaded, stroking the dog's soft fur. Just look at him, he's harmless. Claire sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Fine. But he stays outside. That rule lasted all of 2 days. By the third day, the golden retriever was sleeping at the foot of Erin's bed, his breathing calm and steady, like a comforting lullaby. The more time Erin spent with him, the more she realized something uncanny. He wasn't just any dog. He acted just like her father. He always sat in the same chair her dad used to sit in. He groaned in the same way when stretching in the morning. He nudged open her bedroom door at night to check on her, just like her father used to do. It wasn't possible, was it? Chapter 3, Unspoken Truths. One evening, as Erin sat on the porch with the dog by her side, she whispered, "Dad." The dog turned to look at her, ears perking up, his tail wagging slightly. Her heart pounded. "Is it really you?" The retriever whined softly and rested his head on her lap. A lump formed in her throat. She had never believed in reincarnation, in spirits taking another form, but this felt too real to ignore. "Dad, if it's you, do something only you would do." The dog sat up, wagged his tail twice, and then, just like her father used to when he was deep in thought, tilted his head to the right. Tears filled her eyes. It was him. It had to be. Chapter 4, The Guardian in Fur. From that day on, Erin and the golden retriever, whom she decided to name James, after her father, were inseparable. He walked her to school every morning and waited by the gates until she was done. He barked protectively when strangers approached their house. He even seemed to understand every word she said. But Claire? She refused to believe it. "It's just a dog, Aaron," she said dismissively one evening as she washed the dishes. Aaron clenched her fists. "You don't understand, Mom. He does things only Dad would do. The way he stretches, the way he waits for me to come home, the way he—" "Enough, Aaron." Silence fell between them. Claire sighed, rubbing her temples. I don't want to get my hopes up." But deep down, she knew. She saw it too. The way the dog protected their home, the way he stayed by Aaron's side, the way he looked at her with those deep, knowing eyes. Maybe, just maybe. Chapter 5, A Father's Final Goodbye. Time passed, and James remained a constant in their lives. But fate, as always, had other plans. One winter night, Aaron woke up to hear frantic barking outside. She rushed to the door, her heart pounding, only to see James standing between her and a shadowy figure, an intruder. James growled, his fur bristling, and lunged forward, scaring the men off before he could break in. Aaron was shaking, but James. He just wagged his tail and nudged her as if to say, "It's okay now. You're safe." But the effort had taken its toll. The next morning, James was weak. He barely lifted his head, his once bright eyes dimming. Aaron knew. She knew the time had come. Tears streamed down her face as she held him. "Please don't go," she whispered. "Please." James licked her hand gently. Then, with his last bit of strength, he wagged his tail twice and tilted his head to the right, one final time. And then, he was gone. Chapter 6, A Love That Never Fades. Claire and Aaron buried James under the oak tree in their backyard, the tree where her father used to sit every evening, reading his favorite book. That night, Claire finally let herself cry, holding Aaron close. "Maybe he really was your father," she whispered. "Maybe he never left us after all." Aaron looked up at the sky, at the stars twinkling above, and smiled through her tears. "He's still here. Watching over us." And deep in her heart, she knew it was true. Because a father's love, whether in life, in death, or in the body of a golden retriever, never truly fades. It stays. It protects. It endures. Whispers of the Immortal Moon. Chapter 1, The Celestial Encounter. Under the pale glow of the immortal moon, a soft mist blanketed the peaks of the floating lotus sect, where the boundary between the mortal world and the heavens was said to be thinnest. Deep within the jade forests, where celestial cranes soared, stood Yunshi, a disciple of the sect, clad in flowing white robes that shimmered under the moonlight. For years, she had dedicated her life to the rigorous training of the immortal arts, yet tonight, an unexplainable pull guided her away from the temple grounds. Her feet barely touched the ground as she walked towards the spirit lotus lake, its waters shimmering like a mirror reflecting the stars. It was there she saw him. A lone figure stood atop the lake's surface, unfazed by the water beneath him. His robes were a deep shade of midnight, embroidered with golden threads that shimmered like constellations. His face, carved by the gods themselves, bore an air of quiet sorrow. "Who are you?" Yunshi whispered, her voice barely audible over the gentle ripple of the water. He turned, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "I am a forgotten name in the winds," he said softly. A shadow lost between the mortal and celestial realms. A cold breeze brushed against Yunshi's skin, and she suddenly knew, he was no ordinary man. Chapter 2, The Forbidden Bond. Days turned into nights, and nights into fleeting moments beneath the lotus blossoms. She learned his name, Mo Tianlan, a once revered celestial general who had fallen from grace. His crime? Defying the will of the heavens by protecting a mortal village against the wrath of a vengeful deity. "The gods do not forgive," Tianlan said one night as they sat beneath the ancient peach tree, watching petals fall like celestial tears. "Once you break their laws, they shackle you between realms, neither alive nor dead, neither mortal nor divine." Yunshi's heart ached for him. To live in the world but belong to none, how cruel a fate it was. "You are no longer alone," she vowed, grasping his hand. But the heavens were always watching. Chapter 3, The Trials of the Mortal Heart. The first omen came as a storm that shattered the sect's protective barriers. Elders murmured of an impending celestial reckoning, warning Yunshi that she had been marked by divine punishment. Her master, Grand Elder Bai, summoned her. "You have walked too close to the boundary of fate, child. The heavens do not look kindly upon those who love beyond their station." "Love?" Yunshi whispered, her heart hammering. Grand Elder Bai's expression softened, though his words remained firm. "You must sever your ties with Mo Tianlan, or you will share his fate." But how could she abandon him? How could she forsake the one who had taught her what it meant to yearn, to ache, to dream? Chapter 4, The Path of Defiance. As fate wove its threads tighter, Yunshi and Tianlan fled into the hidden realms, sacred lands untouched by both mortals and immortals. They sought solace in the Valley of Eternal Spring, where time flowed differently, where the stars shone brighter, and where love was untouched by divine decree. They trained together, blending their energies into a force that could rival the will of the gods. Yunshi's sword dances became poetry in motion, and Tianlan's once broken spirit ignited anew. Yet, peace was fleeting. The Celestial Tribunal had sent enforcers to drag Tianlan back to his chains. And this time, they would not show mercy. Chapter 5, The Battle of Destiny. The heavens split open. Celestial warriors descended upon the valley like a storm, their golden spears reflecting the light of judgment. Yunshi and Tianlan stood back to back, their hands entwined, their energies merging into one radiant force. "You must leave," Tianlan urged, voice raw. "If we fight, they will mark you as they marked me." Yunshi smiled, unsheathing her jade sword. "Then let them try." Their love was a rebellion, their bond a defiance against the fate imposed upon them. Their blades danced against the divine onslaught, each strike echoing with the fury of the oppressed. But even the strongest mortals could not fight the will of the gods forever. A celestial spear pierced through Tianlan's chest. Yunshi's scream tore through the heavens. Chapter 6, The Price of a Mortal's Wish. The battlefield fell silent. Tianlan crumpled into Yunshi's arms, blood staining her robes. The stars above seemed to flicker, as if mourning the loss of a warrior who had only ever wished to protect. But Yunshi was not ready to let go. Tears streaming down her face, she lifted her sword towards the sky. "If you will not let him live as an immortal, then let him live as a mortal." The heavens trembled. A voice, ancient and unyielding, whispered through the wind. "Would you trade your place among us for his life?" Without hesitation, Yunshi answered, "Yes." Light engulfed them both. Chapter 7, A New Beginning. When Yunshi awoke, she was in a quiet village, the scent of blooming osmanthus in the air. She sat up, feeling an unfamiliar weight in her chest, a mortal heartbeat. A warm voice called out her name. She turned. Mo Tianlan stood before her, human once more. His celestial glow was gone, his aura no longer burdened by divine energy. And yet, his eyes held the same love, the same devotion. They had lost eternity but gained a lifetime. And in the end, that was enough. Hand in hand, they stepped forward, towards a life unbound by fate, towards a love that would defy the heavens once more in every heartbeat they shared. For love, true love, was always worth the sacrifice. Epilogue, A Love Beyond the Stars. In the centuries that followed, legends of Yunshi and Tianlan were whispered across the lands. Some said they became stars, forever watching over the world they once fought to protect. Others claimed they reincarnated, destined to find each other in every lifetime. But in the hearts of those who knew their story, one truth remained unshaken. Love is eternal, and no power, not even the gods, can stand in its way. Eric's Magical Awakening. Chapter 1, The Ordinary Day That Wasn't. Eric had never considered himself special. In fact, he was as ordinary as a 17-year-old could be: average grades, an obsession with video games, and a tendency to daydream during history class. He lived in a small town where nothing exciting ever happened, and he had long accepted that his life would be as predictable as the ticking of a classroom clock. That is, until one fateful morning. It began like any other day. He rolled out of bed, threw on the same hoodie he always wore, and trudged downstairs for breakfast. But as he reached for the milk, something strange happened. The carton floated into his hand. Eric froze. Had he imagined it? Maybe he was still half asleep. He set the milk down and tried again, stretching his hand toward it without touching. To his utter shock, the carton moved, hovering an inch off the counter before dropping with a soft plop. His heart pounded. Okay, that's new. His mother bustled into the kitchen, oblivious to the floating dairy products. Eric, hurry up, you'll be late for school. Yeah. Right. School. Eric grabbed his bag, but as he slung it over his shoulder, he felt something, an invisible energy, like an electrical current running through his veins. He didn't understand it yet, but one thing was clear. Something inside him had changed. Chapter 2, The Power Unleashed. Eric spent the entire day in a daze. The floating milk carton was just the beginning. At school, when he reached for his pencil, it slid into his hand like a magnet. When he focused on a page in his textbook, the words rearranged themselves, making the boring text about ancient civilizations suddenly interesting. By lunchtime, he was convinced he was losing his mind. That was when he accidentally set his cafeteria tray on fire. It started as a spark, a tiny flicker of blue light that danced across his fingers when he tried to move his tray. Then, poof, his slice of pizza went up in flames. A few people gasped. Someone screamed. Eric panicked and waved his hands wildly in an attempt to put out the fire. Instead, a gust of wind shot from his fingertips, sending trays flying and knocking over a row of juice boxes. Silence. Then, laughter. Dude, what was that? His best friend, Max, asked, grinning in disbelief. I don't know. Eric gulped. But I think I just discovered something crazy. Chapter 3, The Mysterious Stranger. That night, as Eric lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the day's events, his window suddenly flew open. A gust of cold air rushed into the room, and standing in the moonlight was a cloaked figure. Eric shot upright. Breaking and entering is illegal, you know. The stranger chuckled. You're funny. That's good. You'll need a sense of humor for what's coming. Eric's eyes narrowed. Who are you? The men stepped forward, revealing sharp, silver eyes that seemed to glow. The real question is, who are you? Because you, Eric, are not just an ordinary boy. You are one of the arcane-born. Eric blinked. The what? The arcane-born, the men repeated. A rare lineage of humans gifted with magic. Your powers awaken today because your time has come. Eric shook his head. Wait. Magic isn't real. The man smirked and, with a flick of his wrist, conjured a swirling sphere of golden energy. You were saying? Eric's jaw dropped. Chapter 4, The Training Begins. The stranger introduced himself as Aldrich, an elder mage from an ancient order that had protected the balance of magic for centuries. He explained that Eric's powers were raw, untamed, and incredibly dangerous if left unchecked. You nearly burned down your school today, Aldrich pointed out dryly. Imagine what could happen if your powers grew stronger without control. Eric gulped. So what do I do? You train. For the next several weeks, Eric's life transformed into something out of a fantasy novel. Aldrich took him to a hidden training ground, an abandoned warehouse cloaked in illusions where the outside world couldn't see the magic unfolding inside. Eric learned to harness his abilities. He could now move objects with his mind, control fire without incinerating everything, and even create small portals that led to short distances. He felt powerful. But with great power, came even greater trouble. Chapter 5, The Shadows Stir. One evening, during a particularly intense training session, Aldrich suddenly tensed. They found us, he muttered. Who? Eric asked, but before he could get an answer, the windows shattered. Figures in dark robes leaped through, their faces hidden behind masks, their hands crackling with dark energy. Aldrich barely had time to react before the first blast of dark magic hit him square in the chest, sending him crashing into a wall. Eric's instincts kicked in. He raised his hands and sent out a shockwave of golden energy, throwing the attackers back. But they regrouped quickly, their leader stepping forward with a slow, menacing grin. You have no idea what you are, boy, the masked figure said. But soon, you will. Eric had no idea what that meant, but he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. Chapter 6, The War of Magic. Aldrich, weakened but still conscious, grabbed Eric's wrist. "You have to run. Now." Eric clenched his fists. "No. I'm not running." He turned back to the attackers, feeling the surge of power within him. This was his fight now. Fire crackled at his fingertips, lightning sparked in his palms, and the air around him hummed with energy. He was done being ordinary. With a roar, he unleashed his magic, and the battle for his destiny began. The Realm of Arcana, a world of magic and power. Chapter 1: The Awakening of Magic. The world of Arcana was unlike any other. It was a realm where the skies shimmered with cascading auroras, where the rivers pulsed with liquid light, and where the ground itself hummed with an unseen energy. In Arcana, every person was born with a unique power, an ability that tied them to the very essence of magic. They called them arcane gifts. Lena had always dreamed of the day her arcane gift would awaken. She had grown up hearing stories of the powerful spell weavers who could summon storms, the shadow walkers who slipped between dimensions, and the flammeclers who could bend fire to their will. But she was already 16, and her powers had yet to manifest. It was on the night of the Starfall Festival that everything changed. As Lena stood atop the skyward cliffs, watching the celestial bodies rain streaks of light across the heavens, she felt a warmth rising from within her chest. It was a sensation so intense, so foreign, that she gasped. The world around her flickered, and suddenly, the air itself seemed to shift. Then, with a pulse of energy, her vision expanded. She could see everything: the flickering souls of the people in the village below, the trails of magic woven into the wind, the unspoken thoughts lingering in the air like whispers. It was overwhelming, exhilarating, terrifying. Lena had awakened her gift. Chapter 2: The Academy of the Arcane. When a person's arcane gift awakened, they were summoned to Solaria Academy, the grandest institution of magic in Arcana. The school sat upon floating isles, suspended between the mortal world and the divine, hidden behind a veil of golden mist. Lena's arrival was met with awe and curiosity. Her power, the sight of ether, was one of the rarest in existence. Only a handful of people in history had ever possessed it. With her newfound ability, she could perceive the very threads of reality, read emotions, and even glimpse into possible futures. At Solaria Academy, students were divided into 4 houses based on their gifts. House Ignis, those who wielded fire, passion, and destruction. House Tempest, masters of time, foresight, and celestial movements. House Umbra, shadow walkers, illusionists, and wielders of hidden truths. House Natura, binders of earth, healers, and life weavers. Lena, as an Etherborn, did not belong to any one house. Instead, she was placed under the guidance of the Archmage Eldrin, a being so ancient that he had witnessed the birth of Solaria itself. Chapter 3: The Unraveling Mystery. As Lena trained, she quickly learned that her gift came with a price. Visions plagued her dreams, whispers of an impending catastrophe, of shadows rising from beyond the veil. Her mentor, Eldrin, grew concerned. "The balance of magic is shifting," he murmured one evening as they stood upon the Academy's highest tower. "Someone, or something, is disrupting the flow of ether." Determined to uncover the truth, Lena joined forces with a group of fellow students, each possessing extraordinary abilities. Kale, a firebrand with the power to summon phoenix flames. Sarah, a tempest wielder who could slow time at will. Dorian, an umbral mage who could traverse through shadows. Naya, a nature-bound healer who communicated with spirits. Together, they embarked on a journey that took them beyond the academy walls, into the enchanted forests of Lumera, the abyssal ruins of Noctis, and the astral bridges that connected Arcana to the cosmic beyond. Chapter 4: The Forgotten Prophecy. The deeper they searched, the more Lena's visions became clear. She saw glimpses of the Voidborn, ancient beings that had once tried to consume Arcana. Long ago, they had been sealed away by the legendary Mage Kings, their power locked within the celestial runes. But now, someone was breaking those seals. Lena and her friends followed the clues to the lost city of Illyria, where an ancient library held the key to the past. There, they uncovered the prophecy of the eclipse. When the moon bleeds and the stars weep, the rift shall open, the void shall creep. One with sight beyond the veil shall either save or doom Arcana's tale. Lena's blood ran cold. The prophecy spoke of her. Chapter 5: The War of Magic. The day of reckoning came faster than they expected. The sky darkened, and from the celestial rift emerged creatures born of nightmares, void-born horrors with tendrils of smoke and eyes like endless voids. Solaria Academy became a battleground. Students and teachers alike fought to protect their home, unleashing torrents of magic against the invaders. Lena, with her sight of ether, became the center of the war, her power the only thing that could seal the rift. But she could not do it alone. As Kale's fire rained from above, as Sarah bent time to slow the enemies, as Dorian danced through the battlefield unseen, and as Naya called upon the spirits to heal the wounded, Lena stood at the heart of the storm. She reached deep within herself, drawing upon the ancient magic of the Mage Kings. With a final incantation, she unleashed etheric light so powerful that it shattered the sky itself. The rift closed. The Voidborn vanished. Arcana was saved. Chapter 6, A New Dawn. The battle had ended, but Lena knew this was only the beginning. The balance of magic had been restored, for now. But whispers of darkness still lingered in the forgotten corners of the world. She had changed. No longer just a girl dreaming of magic, she was now a guardian of Arcana, sworn to protect the realm from whatever lay beyond. And as she stood upon the tower of Solaria Academy, watching the first rays of dawn paint the sky, she knew one thing. Her story was far from over. Epilogue, the legacy of Arcana. Years passed, and Lena's name became legend. Some said she walked among the stars, a protector of the celestial realms. Others believed she had vanished into the depths of time itself, guiding Arcana from the shadows. But in the hearts of those who carried magic in their veins, her story remained eternal. For in Arcana, as long as magic flowed, so too did the legacy of those who dared to wield it for the light. The Enchanted Emporium, a shop of wonders and oddities. Chapter 1, The Door That Wasn't There Yesterday. It started with a door. Felix had walked this street hundreds of times before. It was the shortcut he took from school, the one lined with dusty bookstores and cafes that smelled of cinnamon and ink. But today, something was different. Right between the old tailor's shop and the abandoned toy store, a door had appeared. It was deep mahogany, with intricate carvings of swirling patterns and an old brass doorknob shaped like a cat's paw. Above it, an old wooden sign creaked in the wind. The Enchanted Emporium, for those who seek the unusual. Felix frowned. Had this shop always been here? He glanced around. People walked past as if they didn't see it at all. The more he stared at it, the stronger a feeling bubbled inside him, a tugging, an invitation. Curiosity 1. Felix pushed open the door and stepped inside. Chapter 2, The Shop of Impossible Things. The scent of old parchment, melted candle wax, and something vaguely like electric fizz greeted him. The shop was massive. It shouldn't have been this big. From the outside, it looked no larger than a bakery, but inside, shelves stretched into infinity, stacked with items that defied logic. A sign at the entrance read, "Do not touch unless you intend to buy or be bought." Felix gulped. The shelves were filled with the impossible. A jar labeled, "Bottled Laughter," when he tilted it, the sound of giggles echoed inside. A box of time-skipping tea, which promised, in elegant gold letters, "Take a sip, skip an hour. Take 2, skip a day. Take 3, well, we warned you." A snow globe of summer, which, instead of snowflakes, had tiny, swirling golden leaves and a tiny sun that warmed his palm when he picked it up. A mirror of alternate choices, which didn't reflect him, but rather a version of himself who had apparently taken a different path in life. Fascinating, isn't it? Felix yelped. A man had appeared behind the counter, a tall, thin figure with wild silver hair and an elegant, dark coat embroidered with silver thread. His eyes were mismatched, one gold, one violet. "Welcome to the Enchanted Emporium," the man said with a grin. "You may call me Mr. Wren." Chapter 3, The Rules of the Shop. Felix quickly learned that this was no ordinary store. "The Emporium chooses its customers," Mr. Wren explained, leaning lazily on the counter. "People don't find this shop unless it wishes to be found." Felix frowned. "So, why me?" Mr. Wren only smiled. "That, my dear boy, is up to you to discover. There were rules, of course. Every magic shop had them. You may browse, but be warned, the items also browse you. If something calls to you, it is meant for you, but be prepared for the consequences." never, under any circumstances, open the door of nowhere. Felix didn't even get a chance to ask about the last rule before something caught his eye, an hourglass of borrowed time. It was small, no larger than his palm, with sand that shimmered silver. A tag dangled from its chain. Flip once to borrow a moment. Flip twice to undo a mistake. Flip thrice, well, you'll see. Felix had plenty of regrets, things he wished he could change. He reached for it. Chapter 4, A Borrowed Moment. The moment Felix's fingers brushed the hourglass, a strange sensation filled his chest, a rush, like he had just stepped into the middle of a windstorm. He flipped the hourglass once. And the world rewound. He was back in his classroom, 5 minutes earlier. His spilled ink bottle, the one that had ruined his homework. Gone. It had worked. Excited, Felix flipped it again. This time, he went back an hour, to the moment before he lost his favorite book on the subway. This is amazing, he breathed. I can fix everything. But he hesitated before flipping it a third time. The warning on the tag burned in his mind. Before he could decide, Mr. Wren's voice interrupted. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Felix nearly dropped the hourglass. Mr. Wren's expression was unreadable, but his mismatched eyes gleamed. Time is not something to be rewritten carelessly, my dear boy. Borrow too much, and time will come collecting. Felix gulped. Collecting. Mr. Wren simply smiled and handed him a receipt. Chapter 5, The Debt of Time. Felix didn't see it at first. The fine print on the receipt was tiny, almost invisible. For every moment borrowed, a moment must be paid in return. A chill ran down his spine. What does that mean? Mr. Wren shrugged. Time is fair, Felix. You borrowed minutes. One day, it will borrow minutes from you. Felix swallowed hard and stuffed the hourglass into his pocket. Chapter 6, The Door of Nowhere. Felix returned to the Emporium many times after that. He became a regular, exploring its endless shelves, learning its secrets. One day, however, his curiosity got the best of him. He found himself standing in front of the door of nowhere. It was black as the void, with no handle, no hinges. The only thing on it was a simple note. Once opened, it cannot be closed. Felix hesitated. He had been warned. But something called to him from behind that door. His hand hovered over it. And then, a voice. Are you sure you want to do that? Felix jumped. Mr. Wren stood behind him, arms crossed. Felix exhaled. What's behind it? Mr. Wren smiled, but there was something dangerous in his expression. Everything. And nothing. Felix hesitated. And then, slowly, he stepped back. Smart choice, Mr. Wren said, tapping his cane against the floor. Most people aren't that wise. Chapter 7, The Final Lesson. Felix never did open that door. But he learned that magic always came with a price. Every spell, every enchanted item, every borrowed moment, everything had a cost. And yet, he also learned something else. Magic wasn't about changing the past. It was about learning how to live with the present. As Felix left the Emporium that night, he glanced back at the door. It was gone.